In this video, I will explain the logical fallacy called the loaded question. I'll begin with a general explanation of the fallacy, explaining why it is a mistake, before looking at some examples of people making this sort of mistake. Hopefully by the end of the video, you too will be able to spot and deal with this fallacy. And if not, hit the subscribe and like buttons below. What are you waiting for? The loaded question is a type of informal fallacy. It occurs when someone asks a question that has a controversial and hidden premise, a premise that has an implied truth value. Many questions have hidden premises. Indeed, you probably don't even notice this, as the hidden premise is assumed by everyone. The fallacious loaded question occurs when the hidden premise is disputed or controversial. The classic example of this is the question, "Have you stopped beating your wife?" The hidden premise here is that at some point in the past, you were beating your wife, or indeed, that you have a wife or had one in the past. The trap laid by this question is that the responder risks confirming the hidden premise, regardless of whether they say yes or no. In both cases, they are confirming that they have a wife and that they have previously beaten her. Of course, the loaded question is not always fallacious. As I said, many questions have hidden premises. Consider the following question. Are you going to the party? The hidden premises here are that the party exists or will exist in the future, that the person knows about it, and they have an invitation. But in this scenario, both people understand and agree with these hidden premises. It is not controversial. Loaded questions can appear in all sorts of places. For example, politicians famously say very little using many words, and so journalists can use loaded questions to get the politician to admit to something. Let's have a look at some other examples in more detail. The first example concerns philosophy. Imagine a person is having a discussion with you regarding the first living organisms on Earth, and they ask the following question. Who created the first single-celled organism on Earth? This is a loaded question. The very first word, who, implies that an individual is responsible for creating the organism. That is the hidden premise, and it is a controversial one. It's assumed to be true without evidence. The second word, created, is also slightly loaded, but to a lesser degree. It is a word with certain religious connotations. After all, in the first book of the Bible, the same word is used to describe God creating the earth. Now, of course, religious philosophy does not have a monopoly on the word create, so use of this word does not automatically make it a loaded question. But given the context of how the first living organism came to be, there is a parallel with the Bible. The person asking the question could well be a theist or someone who believes that a God created life on Earth. Because they have this belief, they may not see it as a problem in asking the question this way, as the hidden premise seems to them to be uncontroversial. The next example concerns people reacting to news on social media. Consider the following scenario. A politician is sacked following an interview they did in which they made sexist remarks. A fan of this person on social media posts this news story with the following comment. Where are all the free speech champions now? This example is harder to decipher. The question itself is rhetorical. They are not expecting an answer to it. So what are the hidden assumptions? First, that the sacked politician has a right to freedom of speech. In some countries, this might be controversial, but I think in general, this assumption is not controversial. The next assumption is that people who normally champion free speech should now be speaking up in support of this politician. This assumption is controversial. In fact, it is a fallacy in itself, the black and white fallacy or false dichotomy. The fan is attempting to paint the picture that one can either support free speech and back the politician, or they can oppose free speech by attacking the politician's remarks. This framing is a mistake. It is possible, for example, to support freedom of speech and to also condemn the comments. The two are not mutually exclusive. The final example concerns a survey question. Surveys, if designed well, can be scientific and allow people to discover the current thoughts of the population. But mistakes can be made. One mistake is to use a loaded question. Consider the following survey question. Why do you think media reporting on the left-handed creates negative perceptions of the left-handed community? There are two hidden premises here. The first is that the media actually makes reports on the left-handed community, and the second assumption is that this reporting creates negative perceptions of that community. Both of these assumptions are assumed to be true, which is controversial. And this may vary depending on where you live, but most people would not agree with these assumptions. They would find it difficult to believe that the media even produces content that highlights this community. They might also question the media's ability to influence people in this way. They would question whether a negative perception even exists, and if it does, whether the media is responsible for it. Now, it can be difficult to respond to such a question without affirming these hidden assumptions, which is what makes it a loaded question. As to why someone would ask such a question, well, I think it is because they genuinely believe the assumptions are true and don't realize that the assumptions are controversial. In other words, confirmation bias. When you see this kind of fallacy, politely point out the mistake. Explain why it is a loaded question. Address the controversial hidden premise. So in the case of the wife beating example, say that you don't have a wife. But be careful. Sometimes the point of such questions is to raise the controversial topic for more discussion. As always, avoid using fallacies, develop better arguments, and have more productive discussions. I hope you now have a better understanding of this fallacy. If you like this content, show your support by subscribing to the channel.